You're locked into Inception Radio Network, Superior, Wisconsin.
You're tuned in to NightVision Radio, exposing the truth one secret at a time. Prepare yourself as we explore the shadow worlds of suppressed history, secret knowledge, forbidden religion, and shine a light on the conspiracies to keep it all from us. Welcome to NightVision Radio. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of NightVision Radio. I'm so happy that you chose to join us this evening, or if you're listening to us in the archives, thanks so much for looking us up and seeing what we have to say. We've got a great show planned for this evening, but first, I want to remind everyone about some special friends of NightVision Radio, and it's the good people at returnofthetroubadour.com. Now, if you're a music lover, or if you, or especially if you're a songwriter, if you know a songwriter, right now, Return of the Troubadour is they're having an international song contest. It's well underway, and if you go to that website, you can see the details, the rules. But what they're looking for is a song that uplifts humanity in some way, a positive message for people, because we know how music can affect us. It can rouse you into a riot. It can calm you down. Music does soothe the savage breast, as they say. And it just provides the soundtracks of our lives virtually. So please have a look, and the contest prize is really good. Or I guess there's more than one prize, but the first prize I know is $5,000 in gold coins. So it is a very, very nice prize for some great positive songwriter. So look them up, returnofthetroubadour.com, and please like them on Facebook. They appreciate it because music can change the world. All right. Well, tonight we have on another great friend of NightVision Radio, Gary Evans. He's from across the pond, but he's here in Southern California this week because he's speaking at the CPAK conference in Palm Springs starting this weekend, actually starting tomorrow through Sunday. So we're going to talk to him about that, and we're also going to talk to him about some special sites around the world, and not only that, but Gary's special abilities when it comes to these particular sites. So stay tuned. Remember, we have a live chat room going. You can find it at inceptionradionetwork.com, and as we can throughout the show, and mostly toward the end of the show, we do take questions via the chat room as we can that are relevant and have our guests answer those. So please join us, and I try to monitor that, and our wonderful producer, MJ, is much better at monitoring that, and he does provide me with the questions from the chat room if I miss them. So please join us. We'd love for you to join in. Well, Gary Evans, thank you so much for agreeing to be on tonight. I'm really excited about what we're going to talk about. But first, I just want to say welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be back. Always nice to talk to you.
Always great talking with you, Gary. And you've been on Night Vision before, but also we've had many conversations about these subject areas. Before we get into some of the sort of the meat of the material, can you just tell me a little bit about this conference that you're speaking at for all our listeners in Southern California who might be able to make it over to Palm Springs?
Yes, certainly. Yeah, so I'm speaking at the CPAK conference. It's actually in Rancho Mirage in the Palm Springs area. So it's starting tomorrow evening, but the main talks are on Saturday and Sunday when I'm speaking in the morning. And I've been working with Walter Cruttenden, who's the founder of CPAK. It's the 9th conference this year, so it's been going on for a while, and it's been run in various places. But it's a nice. We just arrived at there's a Westin resort here. Temperature's very nice, so yeah, it's a great place to be. And there's kind of a family feeling, I'd say. A lot of the speakers come back and publish and release their latest findings to the audiences. And,
well, there's some major scientists that are going to be there as well. I know Robert Schoch, who our audience, as I know, is familiar with, is going to be there. And as you said, Walter Cruttenden, he's going to be speaking. Who are some of the other people on the roster?
Well, I'm very excited to hear the talk by Dr. Dean Radin.
Yeah,
he's got some really good stuff to discuss. His latest book was Supernormal, Science, Yoga and the Evidence for Extraordinary Psychic Abilities. So I think that's going to be a really exciting talk. And Amit Goswami is also, Dr. Amit Goswami is on the lineup. And I've been enjoyed his talks in the past. He's got some great material because he's a theoretical nuclear physicist, retired. And so he's going to be talking about the self-aware universe and various other subjects. And then we've got Marie D. Jones. She's got some good research.
Oh, Marie Jones, yeah, we've had her on as well. She's a great speaker, very interesting lady.
And well, the conference is themed around cycles of consciousness, the Yuga cycles, which ties in to the writings of Paramahansa Yogananda, who wrote Autobiography of a Yogi. If any of your listeners have read that, it's quite a popular book.
I read that. I won't tell you the year that I read it because then I'll be really giving away my age, but I think everybody kind of knows anyway. But I did read that some time ago. And then, of course, the Paramahansa Yogananda people have the self-realization centers out here in Southern California. There's some absolutely gorgeous locations. There's one out in Malibu that's just amazing. And then there's one over on Mount Washington. It's a small neighborhood, hilly neighborhood. It's up on top of the mountain. And it's just a wonderful place.
Yeah, very nice. So it's basically the overview is that there's a cycle of consciousness that affects humanity. And rather than this linear model of progression for human civilization, that in fact we've had more advanced, and you could say either spiritually or self-developed people that are aware of their place in the universe in the past. And you could use, for example, the ancient Egyptians. And then we have this Roman phase of human history. We have a phase that we all have probably heard of, the Dark Ages. We then have the Renaissance, which is the rebirth of ancient knowledge. And then we have us in the modern day. So even though we've been given this progression, which is primitive to modern man, if we actually look at the history that we're taught at schools, that isn't how history has played out at all. So we go into a lot of these subjects, some of the, you could say, aspects of civilization that's perhaps been overlooked or neglected, sidelined by traditional historians, because some of these subjects raise big questions that they don't necessarily have answers to. And
well, when you start bucking accepted history and accepted science, you always run into a lot of pushback, don't you?
It seems to be, but slowly people are getting more open-minded, and we do see a sort of subtle progression and certainly in places like California, where you have quite a forward-thinking people, that some of these things are starting to come back, and you can see that just in the sort of metaphysical areas like the yoga and the meditation, and mindfulness, which is generally accepted by most people now. So we're getting somewhere slowly.
Yeah, I can see it happening. Now, for those that are interested in the conference, you can check it out at cpakonline.com. That's CPAK online.com. Don't go to CPAC because that is the political conservative site. I made that mistake a few minutes ago. So it's CPAKonline.com. And I would imagine that there are availabilities for the entire weekend, and there's probably like day passes as well. That's generally how it works, isn't it, Gary?
Yep. There's still room. We've got a big venue here, and we're expecting a good-sized audience, so people are still welcome to join us.
Wow. You might see me turn up down there, Gary. You just might see me. Now, let's get on to some of the things that you were going to be speaking about at the conference. But first of all, let's talk a little bit just about your background. I know that you are an avid traveler and world explorer. You've been everywhere, and you've been in the process of taking tour groups for the past several years that I know of, and you go along with some major people like Robert Schock, Graham Hancock, and others. You're also doing your own thing. So when you started doing these travels, was that when you figured out that you sort of had this gift for, I want to call you like a human Geiger counter, a human GPS, or a human dowser, because you actually can sense things about these particular sites that have been known to have been venerated over history, that are pilgrims' destinations, and other places that are known to hold energy, to heal, other types of things. But you found at some point that you have an ability that maybe most of us don't have, or certainly we don't have it developed. Can you explain that?
I certainly can. Well, since 2010, I've been helping organise and run tours to Egypt. So that was really a big breakthrough for me. But in 2009, I started to attend yoga. So I kind of had these two, at that point, separate interests. I was attending yoga mainly for stress relief, I'd say, initially, trying to work out what I wanted to do with my life in 2009. And it didn't take too long for me to turn my interests in ancient history and ancient civilizations into a career, because I was helping design websites for conferences in the UK. I quickly became fascinated by these subjects from listening to all these amazing authors whose books I'd been reading since my teenage years. And then I started to represent them as an agent, booking their media interviews, their speaking arrangements, organising these tours to ancient sites, to Peru and Egypt, Bolivia, and we've been doing a fair amount in Europe as well. But so along this journey, I was you could say trying to develop myself as best as I could through yoga, and the style that I chose was yin yang, which is long held postures rather than the kind of fast flowing movements. And quite often in the yoga classes, we will hold these postures for up to 5 minutes, and we do a series of these different postures. And then the yoga teacher say, lay down on your mat and now sense what's happening in your body, because it's working on the same kind of points as acupuncture, these meridian energy points in the body. This is the theory. And by holding the postures for a long time, you're working on the energy system of the body. So I got into a routine of listening to myself. What was happening after these postures? Could I feel these kind of subtle changes in the body? So that was kind of the one side of it. And then when I was going to these very powerful, energetic places, and I mean, at this point, I've lost track of the amount of times I've been inside the Great Pyramid, but it's certainly between 20 and 30. And the temples, and it's almost, I would describe the tours I organise almost as a modern-day pilgrimage, because you take people through the series of pyramids and then you take them through the series of temples, and the people that join us at the start of the tour are, I would like to think, uplifted, elevated, changed for the better by the end of the 2 weeks. And I do see a progression because I'm very interested in the human side of these sites, how they impact people, how people feel while they're there. Do they have some kind of interesting experience? I work with sound, which we can get into later. So sound and the effects on consciousness is something that's come out of spending a lot of time, particularly in the pyramids, because they are very finely tuned acoustically. So I see this development time and time again on the tours in Egypt, where we have a group of people that are kind of coming from the 9 to 5, if they're lucky, grind. They kind of come to us quite sort of stressed and in this normal, you could say, rational mindset. But as we go through these powerful ancient sites, slowly but surely their sort of intuition starts to awaken. Perhaps they're going to start to feel some of these energetic effects happening. Some of them have said, which has really touched me, I've had my first spiritual experience, and that's always nice to hear. So something beyond the ordinary has happened to them, and that's an amazing thing, because once somebody has seen into that kind of side of life, it could really sort of propel them, I think, in a positive direction. So life-changing journeys, hopefully we provide. Of course, there's no guarantees. We're all different, but certainly for some, it is possible.
Yes, yes. Do you feel that, going through these sites as you're talking about, that it's sort of, for those that are seeking it, is sort of an initiatory journey. It's sort of by going through one at a time.
Oh.
Hello?
I'm still here.
I'm sorry, dropped out for a moment.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I'm sorry. Yeah, I think it was on my end. I'm not sure what's going on. But anyway, I know we discovered, as you know, and some of the listeners know, Gloria Amendola and I have taken lots of tours to France and the UK. And we've structured those in such a way, especially the more recent tours, to go around certain positions in the landscape, certain sites of megalithic structures and other things in a certain way. And it sort of opens people up as they go along. And we feel like it's sort of an initiatory practice that, you're going through and your body starts to get in some sort of resonance. It's really a Gloria thing, but I'm just speaking, from a layman's terms. But I know that, when we're there and we're doing these things with an intention, that it does have an effect on people. It's had many healing effects on people and that sort of thing. Is that what you're sort of talking about? And
yes,
when you say people had spiritual experiences, did they share those with you, or what that was like?
Yeah, I've had a number of people share with me on the tours. I mean, my talk at CPAK is more aligned with the science of sound and how sound frequency affects the brain. And there's a lot of solid science. I mean, I'm looking at papers from Princeton, Stanford, UCLA, the University of Trieste in Europe is doing a lot of amazing research with an EEG on the brain. So what we know from the scientific side is, particularly if we're using sound, that you can explain it just very simply by saying that we're kind of left hemisphere dominant. That's the sort of driving mode, using computers and the kind of you could say consciousness or brain activity that we're used to with our Western lives. But when you start to use some of these sound frequencies, what we see happening is that it either balances the hemispheres or actually, different frequencies will have different effects, but you can start to really awaken the right-sided creative side and get into that intuitive space. So that's what the science tells us happens, particularly around the sound frequencies generated by the male voice around 110 hertz. And it seems like a lot of these ancient sites, particularly the Great Pyramid, is tuned to this frequency. So when we go inside and we do, of course, I mean, you call it toning, chanting, ritual chanting is what it would have been known as probably back in the day. So we can see what's happening inside the brain, but this is a very personal experience at that point. So what we can't measure is what exactly is that person experiencing during this process with the sound. And that's when we have to rely on the people's reports. And now that I have these multiple experiences, lots of different tours, I've got used to the experience of taking, I mean, we have people, sometimes 16, 18 different nationalities on these tours. So it's people from all around the world that are open-minded, I would say. But when we use the sound, that we move into this similar kind of space, and we have also had joint experiences. And these are really powerful and moving experiences. I mean, it's hard to sort of intellectualize it and break it down into an English language to convey the depth of the experience. But quite often people will be moved to tears, happy tears, this kind of inner sense of joy. Perhaps they get a deep insight into their path moving forwards, is something I always are very touched by. Or maybe they're just going for the big answers. Why am I here? What's life all about? And it is certainly possible to get some kind of answers to these big questions at these moments.
Wow. Now, when you're talking about toning, you're talking about chanting, or do you actually have instruments in there that does it matter, what the tone is? Is it a certain key? Is it how does that work exactly?
Well, because I study the Eastern philosophy, obviously do a lot of yoga and meditation. I mean, the most well-known sound that's chanted or toned at yoga classes is the Om sound, which we're told is the sound of the universe. So perhaps some ancient yogi was in very deep meditation, when we can only suppose how this sound has come to us. So it's the vowel sound, so it's the kind of the O's or the I's, the U's, that you're reciting these vowel sounds. And what happens when you're inside the Great Pyramid, the King's Chamber is the one that's very resonant to sound. So when you're in there, if you said hello, you're going to get sort of 4 bounces of your own voice. So it go hello, 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 gradually getting fainter and fainter. So you can use this sound effect with a group particularly, although I can do quite well by myself in there. So with the Om and holding that vibration, that's my preferred method, because it tends to get people involved in the process rather than using an instrument. I do use a drum at some of the sites in Europe, which aren't as sensitive to sound as the Great Pyramid. So sometimes a drum and that sort of rhythmic beating can have somewhat of a similar effect. But there's layers to the toning, which I try to share with the guests on the tours. And when you really kind of get your heart and soul involved in the process, it does get energy moving around the body. There's no other way to describe it. And that's when you can really get into these kind of altered states of consciousness.
Wow. I got an interesting question already coming out of the chat room. And since we're talking about it right now, I think I'll go ahead and put it to you before we break at the top of the hour. But Durr in the chat room says, what's Gary's thoughts on the worldwide pyramid finds and the supposed resonance between those geographical points?
I'm assuming he's probably talking about some of the latest pyramids that are being reported. I don't know if he's just referring to sort of pyramids in Egypt and Central South America. I tend to stick to the traditional sites until there's empirical evidence. I mean, I've just found so much in Egypt as opposed, I haven't been to Bosnia yet, if that was the pyramids he was referring to. I have looked at the grids. I mean, is there some kind of worldwide grid across ley lines and these particularly powerful places on the planet. It's quite possible, but again, I'm still waiting to be convinced of that point. Is there some kind of grid of pyramids in Egypt? That's a slightly different question. I'm more closely aligned with that kind of theory. There's a brilliant documentary, The Pyramid Code, which covers that subject. Because all of these pyramids in Egypt, you can see one site to another over sort of, 15, 20 miles away. Sometimes they are, but from one site you can see the Great Pyramid, and then the Great Pyramid, Abu Roash is another site that's not quite so well known. And then it goes Saqqara and Dashur. So all of these sites, even though it's quite a big distance, are in sight lines. So if I had to give a concrete answer, I think there is certainly a smaller grid in Egypt, and I think we need to find more in terms of a worldwide grid.
Yeah, there is some interesting work being done in that area. Several people I know, and we've had Court Lindell on this show, who's a researcher who is finding some amazing alignments to certain structures, including the Great Pyramid at Giza and other structures and monoliths or megalithic structures or structures that have been built specifically on certain points so that they line up with that. So it'll be interesting to find out if there has been some knowledge about structuring things, and actually even some structures right here in the United States that seem to point to the Pyramid at Giza and other points of power throughout the world. But speaking of such things, I know that there are some places in the United States that are very interesting in terms of power points. And maybe next half hour we can talk a little bit more about those and what you have cooking up in terms of the good old USA here pretty soon.
Sounds good.
But again, now in terms of your travels and your tours, what have you got coming up next?
The main ones is I'm going to be in Egypt twice at the start of next year. So I've got a tour in January with Dr. Robert Schock, which I'm very excited about. We're both speaking at CPAK, so yeah, I'm looking forward. Hopefully he's arriving tomorrow. We have a good chance to have a catch up. And then I'm back in Egypt in March with Brian Forster, who was Ancient Aliens Peruvian expert. We've done a couple of tours in Egypt together. So it's about discussing the similarities between Peru and Egypt, what we see with the megalithic construction, how they're seems to be this connection with water. Again, sound we see in Peru, which is something I talk about in my lectures. And also energetically, how they may have been using these subtle energies with these very tightly interconnecting blocks of granite with a high crystalline content. I mean, that's what we see with this megalithic construction. There's always some kind of crystalline, very strong, dense rock involved, and it seems to be some kind of technology that we haven't quite joined the dots on yet. So all of those tours, they're listed on my infinite-connections.co.uk website, and people are always welcome to ask me questions. I'm on Facebook quite a lot, so people can reach me on there easily.
That's infinite-connections.co.uk?
Yes, that's me, and the tours are on there.
And that's for the tours. That's fantastic. Well, I hope you guys all connect with Gary. Also, Gary, do you have a Facebook page for your tours or that people can connect with you on?
Yeah, people can find me on Infinite Connections on Facebook. I'm also got a Gary Evans page and an Infinite Connections PR Facebook group where there's a bit more discussion in there. People should be able to look me up, and you can always find me under Gary Evans Egypt. I seem to Google quite well on that one.
Right, and I know on your Facebook, I think there's more than one Gary Evans, but you've always seemed to have some Egyptian pictured there, so you can kind of pick you out of the crowd pretty easily.
yeah, I'm with my friend Sekhmet on my Facebook photo.
That's right. That's right. I saw that today. All right, Gary, if you can hang in there with us and everybody else too, please stay tuned. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about some of these places in the United States and around the world and Gary's special abilities in terms of those. So stay tuned and we'll be right back. Thanks for hanging in there with us. You're listening to Night Vision Radio. I'm your host, René Barnett. And tonight we're talking with Gary Evans, avid world traveler with a twist. So, Gary, we want to talk about that twist a little bit more right now. I know that you have some special abilities which you sort of discovered through time about these particular types of sites. Can you go into that a little bit more and what that means and share some of those experiences with us so we can kind of get our heads around it?
Yeah, sure. Well, from my perspective, I would say that we all have this sensitivity, and it's like anything with experience, we not only grow to trust ourselves, but it develops. So it's an ability that we all have. Modern cities and things like this, which can be very intense, and particularly when we're talking about all of these kind of electromagnetic pollution and things, it does. And I have lived in cities recently, so it makes you kind of close down this sensitivity because you would feel too much. Now, if you develop yourself or pay attention to this side of yourself, as I would say I have been doing with yoga, as I was describing, tuning into the body, seeing what you're feeling. Quite often the other side of it is with when we have the guests on the tours, the normal kind of tourist way of visiting an ancient site is you'll be shuttled in by the coach. You'll have a guide with you that's going to tell you about the history. You're going to have a few minutes to take pictures of this place that amazing place that you may never come back to. You're just about maybe shoot some video, back on the coach, and off you go to the next site. So that's what I see. That's a traditional tourist tour of a temple in Egypt. Now, what I try to do with those interested in our group is we're going to go into the tour, and quite often I will have people that are kind of used to being still, so either they've learned to meditate or be mindful, because it can be quite uncomfortable for some people when they haven't practiced these things to just sit quietly without too much thought. That's difficult for some people at the start of this, you could say, journey of self-development. But once you've learned to be comfortable in yourself and learnt some kind of even the initial stages of meditation, you're okay. You can sit down, and then you start to be a bit more reflective. You're maybe looking at the temple around you. You'll start to hear the bird song, as you often do in the temples in Egypt. Starting to feel this kind of, because they have palpable atmospheres. Many of your listeners might be aware of when you go into a powerful cathedral, there's this kind of still feeling in the air, and it makes you kind of relax. Well, that's normally present at a lot of these ancient sites. So you can kind of get into that frame of mind, feeling relaxed, starting to sense a bit more of what's around you, listening, not thinking about what you're going to do, what you're going to have for lunch, what I need to take a photo of, because these are all things that are kind of pulling you out of the present moment. It's like this Eckhart Tolle, I think it was a best-selling book, The Power of Now, how powerful being in the present moment is. And it's difficult for many people. I still struggle with this. My mind's going to want to think about a lot of things. So breathing can help. Take some deep breaths to settle yourself, and then just start to sense what's around you. And when you've developed this kind of inner sensitivity through yoga, I mean, Tai Chi, Qigong, all of these kind of techniques, and maybe you're naturally sensitive, that will start to become a bit more apparent. And that's when you were talking about this kind of energy or the vibrational nature of these ancient sites. And it is true, as wacky as it may sound to some people listening, they definitely have different atmospheres at these temples. You can attune yourself by relaxing into them. And that's when what we're seeing, particularly if we're working with sound, but even without the sound, if you're starting to relax the mind, you're going to get more into this kind of right hemisphere or a balanced hemisphere approach, the intuitive space. And again, I think we all have this innate intuition. It's something that we have as humans. How developed it is, again, is practice. It's like you could say intuition's like a muscle. So if you don't use your intuition very often, it's an underdeveloped muscle. And if you start to use it more often, it's going to get stronger and it'll be more useful. I think most people, the intuition will kick in at a really critical time. Perhaps something steer you out of the way of trouble, this kind of thing. I mean, there's lots of these reports that happen. It can get through to us when it's like really critical for self-preservation, but we haven't become able to rely on it on a daily basis. So all of these kind of things I would encourage the guests to do. Come in, sit down, find yourself a spot, and then just kind of relax and try and be in the present moment, and then start to sort of open these extra senses that we all have. And as we go through the tour, the practice starts to help them. Of course, I'll be open to questions and encouraging people and sharing the ways that I find useful, so I can hopefully share my experience that's helpful to other people. And now that I've done it enough with all of these different groups, it's really about just giving yourself an opportunity. We're so busy rushing around that we don't give ourselves an opportunity, because these techniques are not just useful for ancient sites. You can be in a beautiful forest or just out in nature and just start to be more aware of your surroundings. So I think it's good advice for everyone, really.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I have a terrible time quieting my mind, but I really, really need to do that. Now, have you noticed that it's helpful to do that practice outdoors? I mean, of course, I get the whole idea of meditating in the Egyptian temples and pyramids and things like that, and what would be the purpose for that. But when you're, on your home turf, is it better to try to connect with the earth? Is there such a thing as sort of grounding yourself with the earth, or does it matter?
Well, I'm a big fan of grounding. There was a good documentary that came out recently. I think it was called Grounded. So there's a lot of solid science about just having you can just do your bare feet on the ground, on the grass. I mean, I love the sand. If you're on the beach and you can get your bare feet on the sand, that always feels fantastic. And what they know about that effect is that it's going to slow the heart down. It can help lower blood pressure. If you suffer from high blood pressure, these techniques could be useful. So it's worth looking into that subject. But it's generally good for de-stressing. I mean, the point that our science is at, that we're just kind of starting to grasp how these subtle energies do affect us. So if you really look into the scientific papers, you can find the science that backs these things up. But is it in mainstream public consciousness? No, not really, because it's not mentioned very much on the television. And that's really kind of where I'm looking now. We can find these peer-reviewed more often than not papers. The science is kind of established, but has it filtered through into the mainstream? Not so much. So grounding is something that I normally do at the temples, anywhere in nature. I mean, meditation anywhere is better than not. I meditate on my flights it was 10 hours 15 minutes from London to LA. When I flew over, I did meditate quite a lot of that flight, and it makes the journey go a lot quicker.
Wow, that was a pretty fast flight.
Yeah, I think we had a good tailwind this time.
Yeah, absolutely, because I know that flight can be anywhere from 10 to 12 hours, and it seems like every other time I've made it, it's been the 12. You're just like, when am I going to get out of this plane? But it's good. I guess it is ideal that you could do this practice anywhere. And I guess that's the whole point. But I do like the idea of the grounding as well. And I know what you mean about just getting your bare feet on earth, either on the grass or on the dirt or in the sand. It does have a very calming effect. definitely.
Yeah.
Like it kind of sort of takes you back to childhood as well, when we all went barefoot outside and played, and it is a very, very good feeling.
Well, I think
Now, go ahead.
well, just to pick up on the childhood point, because a lot of the things, spending time in nature, yeah, the barefoot thing. I mean, yeah, swimming in the ocean, the appreciation of nature. I used to love that as a child, and then when I sort of went into the 9 to 5 office environment, I didn't have a lot of time to do that anymore. And it got to a point where I wasn't doing it at all. And as I've gone down this self-development path and then started to pick up these things that I used to enjoy as a child, it's like a light bulb going off, because they bring us that joy we felt as a child. You can still experience it as an adult. And yeah, I think that's been one of the biggest revelations, that for our inner peace, this sort of, I mean, you can just boil it down to our stressed lives when we're very busy. If we're not able to find time to give ourselves a chance to relax, then of course the stress compounds and we just get more and more and more stressed. So a lot of these techniques or timeouts are really, really fundamentally do need them.
Now, getting back to your sort of abilities in terms of these sites, now, can you just sort of walk us through one of your more powerful experiences at these sites, and what it is that you feel and are able to pick up on?
Yes, no, I will be glad to, and I will dig out a quote for you. But I've had many powerful experiences in the Great Pyramid, and that never fails to disappoint when we're working with the sound. It felt like an epiphany when I was in the Great Pyramid, when we're talking about this Om sound, and the yogis call it the sound of the universe. Well, when we've worked, we have quite often have 2-hour private visits inside the Great Pyramid, so it's just for our group. And when you work with that sound Om, and it'll probably take you about, I'd say, sort of 20 minutes that you start getting an effect. And after about the half an hour point, using that sound as a group, it does feel like you're starting to merge into something much greater than you. This would be a very simple explanation. There's this kind of coming and going nature when you're in the Great Pyramid, so the sound kind of comes and goes, and I can only describe it as it's a bit like the waves on the shore with this sound. So it comes in and out and in and out, and it's this kind of relaxing feeling, but the sound of course is coming straight through your body. You're in this massive chamber, the King's Chamber. The whole thing's resonating with sound around you, and there's this term called sympathetic resonance. So if you vibrate something strongly enough, something inside it particularly, it's like if you were vibrating a glass and there's something inside the glass, you'll start to see it jumping around. So this is the kind of effect that's happening on the human body when you're inside. So we're moving into this kind of intuitive space, this very creative space, where you can have these very deep epiphanies. And quite often at that stage, if I've been asking a deep question about perhaps what I need to do next in my life, is there something that I can share with people? Because really that's what I'm trying to inspire myself, trying to grow, and hopefully share something of value to others. That's really the main point of what I'm trying to get to at the moment. I want useful things that can help other people also be inspired, and for them to find their way forwards. So that's quite often what I'm doing when we're in the Great Pyramid.
You know, someone in the chat room calling themselves One Eternal Being says, I have recordings of many of the chants all done in the Great Pyramid. Have you recorded any of those
Yes.
on your trips?
Yeah, they
and
are.
Then, do you listen to them back when you're back home, or?
Well, yeah, there's a few clips of me on YouTube. I've shared them. I think the most profound. I've had some very good feedback from people listening to my toning, because my style was a bit different to most people. I had a lot of time to experiment with. It's almost like an sound experimentation chamber inside the Great Pyramid. So you can kind of use a sound, and then with my sensitivity, I can see how it's affecting my. So I had quite a lot of these different periods when I first started, and I came up with a technique that I now try and share with the groups, which I would say energizes the body, probably gets you into a clearer frame of mind. And I was at a conference in Minneapolis last year, and I had a huge speaker set up. We almost had like a concert speaker set up. I think it was $40,000 the audio visual set up for the conference. So I worked with the audio guys to try and get my recording as close to the Great Pyramid as I could, because it's got these very low bass tones that penetrate deep into the body. And there was a radio show host, and it was a huge room we had. It was like 200 feet long, because it was an old station waiting room. And this radio show host was sort of 150 feet or so away from me. And she didn't know what I was saying. But when I finished giving the lecture, she came up to me and she said, I felt like I was pushed out of my body when I was listening to that recording. What on earth were you doing? And I explained to her that when she felt this kind of sensation, I was explaining to people that these sound frequencies can basically move your awareness. It works. It's like Kundalini. It works with the energy up the spinal column. And I was explaining this process as I was playing the recording, basically. And she felt like her energy got pushed out the top of her head. And initially I thought she was actually telling me off for playing the recording, but she said it was the most amazing experience, but it took her a while to kind of feel like she was back on planet Earth.
That's not such a bad thing, I would think.
No, I guess
Go on a little trip.
I give people an advisory notice now when I play these recordings on huge sound systems, because the sound frequencies can. I mean, she was obviously very sensitive, but I did have a very good reception from the audience, and it's something a bit different. So yeah, I had a lot of questions from people after that.
So you played these recordings at a conference, and obviously you were not in a pyramid, but you were playing back the recordings that you made in the pyramid, and they did have an effect still, even outside that venue, outside that pyramid location. They still had the effect.
Yes.
The tones did. Oh, that's good to know. I'm going to have to go on YouTube and find. How do you look that up on YouTube? Just Gary Evans sound?
That is a good question.
I bet I can find it.
Bet there's a Gary Evans Great Pyramid or something on there somewhere.
Yeah, Gary Evans Pyramid or toning or something like that, possibly. Yeah, I'm going to have to check that out. That's really interesting, because it seems like now sort of the science is catching up with some of these things that we just thought, in the past have been thought to sort of either be spiritual, magical, or just a hoax. Now there are certain ways to quantify certain things, as you were saying. So it's kind of interesting and wonderful to have that corroboration that there is really something going on. It's not imagination.
No, well, that's what I'm going to be talking about at CPAK this weekend, these various papers that have been released. And in fact, this information has been in the public domain. Well, they've been certainly back to at least the mid-90s, where they've started to see that there's this engineering that's been done at these ancient sites, and it isn't just accidental. Like, they can see it's part of the design for the sites. Of course, it's a bit subjective. Okay, well, there's this acoustic effect at the site. What were they doing with it? But when we start to see that the frequency, this 110 hertz, seems to be the pitch that is the common point between a lot of these sites, and we're talking about sites in Egypt, Peru, England, common traits between all of these different countries, all tuned to this same pitch. And then when we look at the ECG on the brain, we see that around this 110 hertz, that's when we're having this big shift with the left and right-sided dominance. So the science, there's not really any arguments. These are peer-reviewed papers. They're coming from leading universities. It's multiple universities at this point that are finding, and researchers around the world that are finding the same effect. The point that we're kind of missing, the science can prove the sound frequencies, it can prove what's happening to the brain, but mystical states of consciousness is not something that we have the measuring equipment for. And that's in fact what Miriam Kohler at Stanford made the point at. Because consciousness, our awareness, what's happening in the mind, these are all very difficult things that our science hasn't really got to grips with. It still thinks that the human condition dies at death, that there isn't reincarnation, this kind of aspect of the soul, something continues after death, even though we have all of these ancient traditions that tell us that there's something more to us, something much deeper. But our science can't measure that. Whatever that missing quota is, we can't detect it. If we can't detect it, we can't measure it, we can't pull it apart in the laboratory, we can't design it, we can't grow it, then it doesn't exist, is basically what where we are, even though many of us probably feel that there is something much deeper to the human condition.
Oh, yeah. Well, I certainly hope so. And I think that's been proven time and time again, by individuals for themselves personally. But now you were talking about, and we're going to take another break in just a few minutes, but maybe if we could just sort of touch on what are some of the places here in United States and North America. We're all familiar with the ancient sites in the UK and in Egypt and throughout Europe and Asia. But, we're kind of newbies over here in the United States. But that doesn't mean that we don't have our own places that carry this, their own energy and are very special places. Can you sort of give us an idea about what some of those places are?
Yeah, well, for sure. I mean, it's easy to answer the question. You could start off in Sedona, which is,
sure,
I guess, considered by many as the kind of spiritual heartland of the US. We ran the CPAK conference down there. It was in 2011. I mean, I could feel I could feel the area from about 50 miles away as we were driving down due to my sensitivity, and it didn't disappoint me. I mean, it's amazing red rock landscape, and what you find is that these places that have a kind of mythos or attract lots of different interesting people. I mean, Sedona's the kind of Glastonbury of the US, so it's very easy to say, well, go there, because I don't think anyone interested in these kind of subjects that hasn't been would be disappointed. But there are many more. I mean, when we think,
how is it that you're comparing it to Glastonbury? I'd be curious. Is it with the energy, you mean, or?
Well, I've actually just before I left for the US, I went to Glastonbury for a little top up. But yeah, certainly energetically. I mean, I see Sedona as this kind of, you could say, spiritual heartland of America. It seems to people gravitate towards it. I know quite a few people that live there, but similarly, I've spent a lot of time in Glastonbury. I'd say Glastonbury is the same. So sort of, I mean, the history in Glastonbury is incredible, but it's also built up because of the place. It's about the place, the energy there, the kind of feeling in the air. I mean, the water there is amazing. And you go there, and there are certain places where you can kind of get this energetic charge up. You could put it a different way if you didn't want to talk about it in terms of spirituality. You go there perhaps feeling a bit tired, and you kind of get this zap of something. I would call it energetic.
Now, isn't Glastonbury on the Mary and Michael ley lines that go up through the United Kingdom? And I think that, maybe one of the reasons, although, obviously I'm no expert, but it seems that I remembered that. And I do recall, how Glastonbury felt. I have a great friend and fellow researcher who lives in Glastonbury. And so I've been there a couple of times and, and staying with her. She lives right near, the sort of the village, the high street. And it is a wonderful feeling there. It's pretty amazing. And I've been to Sedona. So I see what you're saying. There is something energetic, although to me it's a different energy. And places have their own sort of frequency, their own sort of resonance, or their own feeling?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, once you start becoming attuned, then you're going to be more aware of the differences between these places. And if anything, I'd say I preferred Sedona to Glastonbury, because the measuring stick that I will use is how do I feel in the temples in Egypt, where I mean, if there's a scale of me, either my consciousness, my awareness, my happiness, the Egyptian temples is where I would say that's my kind of 10. That's where I'm at my most happy, or the best place in myself that I've been to. I guess I'd probably give Sedona an 8 on that scale, and Glastonbury, I mean, if I had to, perhaps a 6. I definitely felt stronger, happier, more intuitive in Sedona, and I think it's because of this. I mean, one of the things I was going to look at in the TV show is the geology of these areas, and in Sedona,
you've let the cat out of the bag there for a second. We're going to follow up on that.
For a little teaser in.
That's right. Since you've done it now, we're going to follow up on that right when we come back from this next break. Okay. So I hope you guys will all stay with us. And Gary, you hang in there. Thanks so much for being with us. We're talking with Gary Evans, and we'll be right back. Hi, if you're just joining us, you're listening to Night Vision Radio. I'm your host, René Barnett, and tonight we're talking with Gary Evans, world traveler, and what do we call you, Gary? A human dowser? Or actually, dowsers can be human, but they usually use an instrument, and your body seems to be your instrument.
It seems to be. Well, I answer to a lot of the different things. Experiential.
That's right.
I think I go with experiential ancient sites tour guide normally, something like that.
Oh, that sounds good. That sounds really good, and that's very, very apropos. Now, before we went on the break, you let something slip. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but you were talking about a TV show, and I happen to have some inside knowledge that In Development is a series that would be visiting these particular types of sites inside the United States. Is that fair enough?
That's the plan.
I don't want to give too much away, so I'm going to let you say anything else about it that you'd like to say. But I know that you have some of your colleagues involved on a consultancy basis, and that would more than likely be a part of the on-camera cast as well. But what's exciting about it, to me and to a lot of the listeners here, is that what you're first going to tackle are the sites in the United States.
Yeah.
And just as we were talking about on the break, it's so wonderful to have some of these things coming out for people here in the United States, because it seems like everything is back in Europe, everything is back in Egypt or Asia, some other what feels like a more ancient place. But of course, our land has been here just as long as the land has been, possibly not certain civilizations, but or certain societies. But can you give me any more information? I don't want to pry too much about what you have in mind.
Well, I'm quite happy to share. Well, first of all, what I'm trying to do is extract some of this information that we're discussing and take it to a larger audience is all the questions in my mind are what's relevant and useful to the biggest number of people, what's the biggest contribution I can make, what are our ancient ancestors, what did they know that we've lost that still can help us in our daily lives. And when we have this problem with stress and all of these other modern day problems that we're having to obviously treat quite serious conditions, but when there's ways that these things have been dealt with in the past, and again it's really about my love, I guess, for the landscape and animals and this kind of thing, and the joy that I get from it. So inspiring people to visit places, but then when we put another layer on top of just the natural beauty that's in this country, where we have these powerful sites. And of course, I mean, an easy kind of measuring stick is where did the native peoples venerate? Because
Yes.
once you start to understand that there are these subtleties within nature, and that the native peoples had an understanding of this way of reading the landscape, and they don't just choose random locations. We might try to think, oh, they've just tried to make this mountain special because it happened to be local to them, but it's probably local to them because they've been travelling through the landscape, felt this feeling, and then decided to make it home at some point. So it's not just random locations. And whenever I go to these places and I give myself an opportunity to try and pick up on that, I've very rarely been disappointed. And this is really the kind of mental leap I'm going to try and convey this in a TV show. So what we can do, Robert Schoch, who's a geologist at Boston University, I feel very fortunate to have got to know him. He's most well known for his geological analysis of the Sphinx in Egypt. He was in an Emmy Award-winning documentary. So I've been talking to him about the natural forces of the Earth. And again, when we start to look at fault lines, where we have this kind of, we know there's this energetic occurrences happening under the planet. And there's various different natural forces, but some of them we can measure. So we can measure like negative ions, which are generated by water. So when we're close to a waterfall, a river, the ocean, negative ions are generated, which are actually the ones that we like as people. Computers generate positive ions, and they're not good for health. Negative ions attach to positive ions in the air. So if a germ is positively charged, so when you're by the ocean, a lot of germs and pollution are knocked out of the air. There's a lot higher oxygen content. So the brain's getting a higher level of oxygen, and then our creativity can flourish more. So if you're an artist going near a waterfall, a river, or the ocean, it might make you feel particularly inspired. So we can measure this. We can measure the negative ions. That's quite a common thing. You can get negative ion generators for the room to improve oxygen quality, but also the electrical current in the earth. When I was talking about Sedona, the red rocks have a lot of iron. So we can measure these kind of things, the electromagnetics, the magnetism of some of these rocks. And these are some of the subtle forces we think are actually we're picking up on levels that we're not aware of, but we can measure them now with electronic equipment. So the TV show will measure these subtle forces. I will go with my sensitivity because I think I can actually feel these forces before we get the electronics out a lot of the time. So we'll be able to compare my sensitivity with the electronics. We can look at the myth of the areas because a lot of these areas will have myths attached, strange occurrences that perhaps are known to happen there. It really depends where we want to go with the show. We can go at it from a kind of location perspective, why people should visit these places and look at the locations. We can look at the human condition, how we feel after going to these places. And I could probably go through a series of, you could say, experiments or different experiences with people and see if we increase their sensitivity over time. So there's quite a lot that we can play with. But really, just trying to inspire the general public to look around their area. Perhaps you're not too far away. I've made up a provisional list of locations, and I've got 15 different states listed from looking around. I mean, there's plenty out there to explore once you start looking. The key really is to look around you and see what you've got close by.
Yeah, absolutely. I like what you said about looking into, the Native American tribes to see what are the locations, that they were making pilgrimages to or building around or venerating. And I love that. And you said, you think that it wasn't just a random thing that they picked certain locations. But don't you think also, or what do you think also about the fact that they do venerate those sites in you and your tours go to certain places and then you venerate those sites? Do you feel like the act of, pilgrims, if you will, coming to these particular sites and, doing their meditation, doing their toning or whatever their practice is, do you feel that those acts keep those sites imbued or keep continuing to imbue those sites with more power because of the power that we see in them and the power that we're feeling there? Is there a give and take, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it seems to be. I mean, it's kind of like the atmosphere when you go out to dinner. I mean, it depends on the people around you. I mean, if you've got a lot of happy people around you and having a great time, you kind of get into that frame of mind. But if there's perhaps a fight happening in the bar or something, I mean, it makes you feel completely differently. And that's just that's an immediate effect that most of us have perhaps experienced. So when you're talking about these huge tracts of time, and we probably say we're still talking about thousands of years at some of these places in the US. So I mean, we know in Egypt, these temples, we're going to push them back to 4,500 years, buried for sand for a while, perhaps in Egypt. But there does seem to be a correlation between location and the time it's been used, and there's plenty of experiments about the intention, the effects of meditation. I mean, there's been statistical studies on the amount of people meditating at a certain time. There's some papers out there about crime dropping in certain areas when these kind of studies have been carried out. So it's another component. It's a subtle component once again, perhaps overlooked by most people, but if you go there in the right frame of mind, just willing to explore them, you may start to pick up on these subtleties.
Really interesting stuff. We're going to be looking for that TV show to come on. We need more things like that on the air. And we've got, oh goodness, we're down to about the last 13 minutes of the show, and I'd like to add in some questions, if you don't mind, from the chat room. Jim Bob wants to know if you have heard about the resonating quality found on the moon. Well, we've been talking about the United States, Europe, Asia, Africa, all the world, and now we're talking about the moon. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, the only connection that I've heard about the moon, and I'm definitely not in my area of expertise at this point, it is he referring to the fact that it sounds hollow. Is that the resonance that's being referred to, perhaps? But I'm not sure if I can shed a lot more light on that subject, I'm afraid.
Yeah, you're more on the Earth right now. You haven't taken a tour to the moon yet, have you?
Unfortunately not, no.
No, maybe one of these days.
But if he's got any clarification on the direction of the resonance, I might have had something extra to add, perhaps.
Okay, we'll see if that comes back toward us via the chat room. But Dur would like to know, what are your feelings as to the ley lines across the planet? Does he feel they are energy points to draw power and vision from? I think we've kind of gone into that a little bit. can you talk about that a little bit more, the ley lines?
Yeah, well, it is an area that I've looked at a lot. It certainly seems like various sites have been situated along these straight lines. It does seem like it's very clear to see in England, particularly. I mean, there seems to be a line that's from England, and you can trace it all the way to Lake Titicaca in Peru, and I have been down there, and it's again very energetic. There seems to be more evidence coming out in England recently that these roads that we thought were built by the Romans are now being pushed back another sort of 6,000 to 8,000 years, and these are very straight tracks. And I think there was even some that were shown in the US that go over the tops of mesas. So it doesn't seem like these lines that have been drawn on the landscape or followed were actually for people to walk across. I mean, if it just goes straight to the foot of a mesa, goes across, you can see it on the top of the mesa, and then it continues afterwards. So it does seem like there's something else at play, that's for sure.
So these sites that you're talking about that are special and energetic, have you found that they generally correspond with a ley line or with a ley line intersection? Or is that sort of not what you're looking for? You're just looking for the specific points in no matter where they happen to fall?
That is more of my ethos. It's just because when I started I was looking at the ley lines, and I mean, if you have a map and you have some ancient sites, I mean, there's a lot in England. There's just hundreds of ancient sites around Stonehenge. Most people aren't aware. Many of them have disappeared. There's small stones left. There's still some that are buried under the ground that I've heard farmers have been discovering, and then they're kind of hidden again because of all the complications. So if you look at a map and you look at points on a map and then you draw them, I mean, it's quite easy to connect it as an independent researcher, and it's very subjective. So what I'm trying to stick to with my own research is something more tangible. So is there a place I can go to and I have some kind of interesting experience, or I feel more peaceful, rested, and then I can directly share that with somebody. And so I've yet to be, I'd say, entirely convinced of a lot of the speculative research. Not to say that it isn't correct, but it's just very difficult to prove it empirically. So I haven't gone down that road with my own research. That's the main point. But probably it needs more people to pick up the baton and say it is difficult to see the big picture now after so many thousands of years with so much missing. It would have probably been much easier to see these ley lines and all the sites that are connected. So yeah, it's definitely a lot more difficult now.
Yeah. And by the way, that was the hollow resonance, I guess, of the moon that Jim Bob was talking about. Another question from the chat room from Durr says, please ask Gary his views on crop circles and the resonance of the designs. Now, I know you've been to a lot of crop circles because you're from the land of crop circles.
Yes. Yeah, no, I think I've probably been about half a dozen, maybe slightly more, because the crop circles, for anyone listening, do happen around a lot of these ancient sites. It's in Wiltshire, England, Avebury, which is called the world's largest stone circle. It's actually bigger than Stonehenge, and it's about 45-minute drive north of Stonehenge. So I have a good friend there, Maria Wheatley, an author and tour guide to these places. So I spent a lot of time in that direction with her, and the crop circles appear when we're going out to see the sites, not literally as we're going out, but when I'm staying in the area quite often. Crop circle season tends to start, it can start as early as April or May, depending on the weather, but predominantly you see most of the circles in July and August. The crops get cut in August, again, depending on the weather when that happens. The circles are appearing around these sites, which are Wiltshire and this area is my favourite location in England that I've visited so far. Again, it has this kind of quality to it. I call it a magical landscape because nothing else really does it justice. It has a quality to it that makes it stand out in my mind. I always feel happy returning. It never gets old. Likewise, visiting these sites. Everybody that I've ever taken there has been moved. It's this kind of beautiful rolling hills.
Now, Avebury's where the big horse is, right?
There is a white horse.
The big horse. Yes.
Yeah, the White Horse. Yeah, that's not too far away. I've been there a few times. In terms of the crop circles, it's been difficult for me to distinguish between, you could say, the crop circles and the landscape, because I feel the whole area very powerfully. I've arranged speakers at crop circle conferences and been there, and I have many friends that follow the crop circles. And it does seem like these people, there's a number of researchers out there that kind of decode quite often the geometric patterns. And it seems like some people, they do feel like they're helped by the way that they're decoded. I mean, from my perspective, there's many paths to perhaps the same goal in self-development. And it does seem like crop circles have got something to offer certain people. I'd certainly encourage anyone listening, if you ever get an opportunity, to visit them and make your own minds up. I think that's all any of us can really do.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I have a dear friend, a famous author by the name of Henry Lincoln, who was one of the co-authors of Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which kind of shook up the world back in 1982. Another Englishman, and has written many books since then, The Holy Place and Key to the Sacred Pattern. And he always says, one door is all that's needed. So if you found your door, then that's your way in. Someone else might have another way in. And I think it's the same with a lot of the work that you're doing and some of our other friends are doing in terms of research and looking into these correlations between these places, and perhaps some of the knowledge that we once had that we're trying to recover now about these sites. It's like, you know, one person is taking that thread of the mystery, another person is taking that thread, and there are people all over that are working, just sort of beavering away in their own private little studies at home and doing their research. And there's so many pieces of the puzzle that I think it's wonderful that we have different ways of getting into it, because otherwise I don't think one person could get anywhere near figuring out a lot, because it has to do with so many layers of information, so many subtleties. So it's wonderful that you're doing what you're doing, and certainly that there are others out there doing what they're doing in this world.
Well, yeah, I mean, we'll say it would be boring if we all were the same, and the hope with what I'm looking at, I mean, I certainly feel like I've helped myself. It's an ongoing process, definitely not the finished article. I think I'd be bored if I stopped learning. I hope to never reach that point, really. And looking around at the amount of subjects that interest me, I don't think that's going to be a challenge, and that's probably why we need reincarnation. There's plenty to come back and learn the next time around. That's right.
Well, it has been really great having you on. We're very close to the end of the show, and I want to talk a little bit more before we close for those who may have joined us a little bit later about the conference where you're appearing this weekend, starting tomorrow evening, and that's in Rancho Mirage near Palm Springs.
That's
and
right.
It's called the CPAK, CPAK online.org conference. Have a look, and there are going to be some great speakers there. Gary, tell us a little bit about it in the last couple minutes here.
Yeah, well, we're kicking off with a kind of meet and greet tomorrow night, so still time to come down and see us. The talks start on Saturday. Yeah, we've got an amazing lineup of speakers, many of which I know very well. Laird Scranton, that talks a lot about this ancient symbolism, the commonalities between various different ancient cultures, and he's even sort of tying it into quantum physics. There seems to be a lot hidden in the ancient symbolism of these cultures, so his research has fascinated me. Dr. Robert Schock, so he's talking about Egypt, and he's also been looking at Göbekli Tepe, this ancient, possibly temple site that was found in Turkey, and they've carbon dated it to 10,000 BC. So that site, it should be rewriting our history books, because it shows that human civilization was a lot more advanced when we're told they were just hunter and gatherers. And there's, I think there's a new site in Indonesia that he's also been looking at, that he'll be discussing. There's some interesting, exciting research being done over there. And Joseph Selby, the conference is, as I mentioned earlier, orientated around this grand cycle of time, the Yuga cycles, as the Indians called it. Plato called it the Great Year, and it's probably lasted something around 24 to 26,000 years. Walter Cruttenden, who's the founder of CPAK Conference, made a great documentary called The Great Year, which goes into this in a lot more detail. And so we're looking at history.
Gary, I'm sorry, we got to go. We're going to be cut off here, but that's the CPAK conference in Rancho Mirage. Gary Evans, thank you so much. Good night, everyone.